Whether you're a content creator, filmmaker, or anything in between, chances are you're going to need a good, high quality voiceover at some point. In this tutorial, I'm going to take you from the recording process all the way through to the editing and mixing. So let's get right into it. First thing we're going to consider is what we're recording into. So we could record into a standalone interface like the Zoom F6. We could record directly into our laptops or computers using an audio interface. And with devices such as the DJI Mic 2s, we can actually record straight into the microphones. In this tutorial, we're going to focus on recording into the Zoom F6 and the DJI Mic 2s. And that's purely because recording into the Zoom F6 and the audio interface that would go directly into your computer use the same principles. With the Zoom F6, we're going to be recording with 3 different microphones. One will be the Shure SM7B, the other will be the Shure SM58, and a Sennheiser MKH 416P48. There are just a few principles that we need to stick to, one of which is recording levels, and we should always aim to be recording between -12 decibels and -6 decibels. Recording no higher than -6 decibels gives us enough headroom in post-production, as well as making sure we don't clip the recording. -12 decibels will nullify background noise and unwanted hiss. The microphone position will be a crucial step in getting clean recordings in an untreated room. This will help to also nullify background noise and any unwanted reverberations. It's also advised to plonk yourself in the middle of the room instead of being crammed up against a wall or in a corner, which will create bass traps and, again, unwanted reverberations. So when it comes to microphone positioning, we'll want the microphone about a little finger's distance away from the mouth, as well pointing upwards to the mouth instead of directly in front. The second camera is set up on the Zoom, ready for recording. I've got my headphones, I've got my microphone, and with the help of ChatGPT, I've got a script. The audio settings on the Zoom F6 that I always use for voiceovers are a 48 kHz sample rate, and I'm always recording in 32-bit float. And even though 32-bit float does let you bring down clipped audio in post, it's always best to have good recording practices and not be lazy just because of this function. So first things first, all we need to do is press record. For the first recording, we're going to use the Shure SM7B.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
Cringe. Hopefully the audio levels are sticking to what I put. And now with the Shure SM58.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the mic, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
Now this one's with the Sennheiser shotgun microphone with phantom power engaged on the Zoom.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the mic, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
Now we've recorded all 3 microphones into the Zoom F6, it's time to record directly into the DJI Mic 2s, which I'm using to record this video. So as it's conveniently placed on my t-shirt, what I'm just going to do is bring it up a bit to the positioning that I mentioned before.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the mic, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
Now that we've finished recording our voiceovers or ADR, it's time to move on to the editing process. And for this, I'm going to be using Logic Pro on Mac. You could use Prem, you could use Audition. I would highly recommend using DaVinci Resolve because their sort of built-in DAW is pretty great. It'll probably be as close as you can get to Logic, and of course they've got a free download, so if you haven't already got it you can start messing about in there. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the folder that you can download for free. We're going to go Gianni's Epic Voiceover, and for the first one we're going to select Shure SM7B. So here we have our audio recording. What we're going to do is we're going to start building up our chain. Actually, firstly, let's have a listen through and check our audio levels that we'll be able to monitor down here. So I'll reset this.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
So it looks like we're peaking at minus 6.6 decibels, which isn't too bad. With the Shure SM7B, it's going to have a bit of a more rounded tone to this microphone, and we can tell my voice is sounding quite deep. But before we get on to editing anything like this, the first thing we're going to load up is a compressor. Now, I'll quickly mention all the plugins that I'm using are by Waves Audio, and that's just purely because they're really great, high-quality plugins. Firstly, we're going to start with a compressor, and because our peaks are towards the higher end, the first thing I'm going to do is put a -9 threshold. I'm going to go with a 4.2 ratio. I'm going to bring the attack down. I'm also going to change the release. So after that, I'm going to add another compressor. I'm going to mimic most of the settings, except for I'm going to change the threshold to -12. And then once again, a third compressor. I'm going to change the ratio to 2.2, 1.8. These settings are pretty general. You don't have to follow them to the T. Depending on the audio, the peaks, you're going to have your different settings anyway. So for this particular one, I've put the compressor with the -9 threshold first because of the levels going up to -6. But if, say, the recording was closer to -10, I would bypass that and I'll just have the two -12 compressors. So let's just take a quick listen to see whereabouts we are with the audio levels. So at the minute we're sitting around -11, 11.8. So what I'm actually going to do here, I'm going to add a limiter. So now with the limiter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down to -12, so it just stops anything going above -12 decibels. And with the threshold, what I can do is we can increase the quieter parts, bringing them up to -12 decibels. And the reason that I've got the compressors before is because, as we can see on the right-hand side of this particular plugin, this monitors the gain reduction. And if we were to, say, bypass all of these and just have straight -12, we'll see a lot of gain reduction come in.
Through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio, without missing a beat.
And the more gain reduction we have, the more chance there is of digital distortion, especially when we start to try and bring up the lower parts. So say we set this to -14.
His dramatic. Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover.
See on the peaks, the limiter's coming in quite hard. So I'll turn back the compressors on and I'll reset this quickly. So I'm going to set this to -12, so nothing's going above -12. I'm going to go -14, so anything a bit lower is going to be brought up with the limiter.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover,
I'm just going to monitor the
Gianni's stomach
mixer here.
A loud growl that echoed through the studio, without missing.
And that's looking pretty flat. It's looking nice. So what I'm going to do is add another compressor, but I'm not actually compressing here. What I'm doing is I'm using the makeup gain to now bring this audio up to -8 decibels.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach.
So now we've brought it up to -8 decibels. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add some reduction EQ. So I've just got a 2-band EQ here. I'm just going to have a look.
Through recording.
So we can see already here in the lower tones, I'm getting quite a lot of response. So I'm going to put a high pass, about 80 hertz, and have a listen now.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover.
So just in case you don't know, what a high pass is doing is it's removing any of the lower frequencies of what you set. So if I was just to go through this,
midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl.
It's not letting anything below that point pass through. So I'm going to reset it back to 80.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that.
So it's still a bit boomy on the low end of the frequency. What we're going to do is I'm now going to dip a little bit around 350 Hertz with my second band. I might set this to about -3 for now. I'm going to change the shape of the cue. Have a listen.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone. And that, folks, is the sound of...
So now we've got our reduction EQ. Let's take a listen to it with.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl.
So what we're doing here is we're sort of shaping the sound of the voice. Now I'm going to add another equalizer, but this time I'm going to be adding in frequencies. So as I've got it set at the minute, I've got a 3 decibel boost at 110. I've got a 1.4 decibel boost at 10k hertz, and at 12k hertz I've got a 2.3 decibel boost. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to make adjustments to these 3 bands, specifically for this recording. Let's have a listen.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover.
So as it is, it's sounding, again, boomy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to reduce the low end. I'm going to bring this down.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone. And that, folk. Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio.
Because all of these haven't been recorded in a perfect environment, and sometimes it's just the nature of certain microphones, you can start to hear that the hiss is becoming more prominent, which we're going to fix up soon. But firstly, after this, I'm going to add another limiter at -6, just to make sure nothing goes over that point.
His dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing...
And I quite like the voiceover to be flat, so I'm going to actually decrease the threshold a bit to -7.5.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl.
So reaching that -6 point a bit quicker. And the reason I'm leaving the noise reduction to the end is because we're going to utilise a bit of AI, and that's quite demanding on my computer. You could use EQ to sort of shape out these unwanted frequencies, and that's what I was doing for a long time until Waves brought out their noise reduction plugins. But I find with AI, not only is it increasing your workflow speed, it just sounds great at this point, especially when it's done right, which we'll go over in a minute. So again, another compressor, but we're not actually compressing the audio. What we're going to do is use the makeup gain again to increase this by 3 decibels to bring it up to -3.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud...
One more time, I'm going to add a limiter, -3, -3.5, just to increase those low ends very, very slightly. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some sibilance removal, so the S's and T's aren't as prevalent in the mix. So I'm setting this to -12, which is the point at which these S and T's and such will be reduced when it's detected by the threshold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this play through and mess about.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone. And that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
So again, what this is doing is it's sort of flattening out the sound, making the S's and T's not so prominent and standing out when it's playing back. One more thing before we move on to the noise reduction. I'm going to add a bit of reverb here. So I've got my reverb settings. I'm going to change the decay time to about 0.6 of a second. And I'm just going to shape it a bit with an EQ. And I have put my reverb on a bus, and that's purely because this reverb is set to be 100% wet sound. So instead of putting it on the signal chain and having it somewhere between the dry and wet, it's just 100% wet coming through this bus. And what I will do is I will solo that so you can hear that bus just by itself.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover,
So if I just solo this bus,
let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio.
That's just the wet signal
Muttered into the microphone.
The reverb.
And that, folks, is the sound of Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio.
So I'm just adjusting this here to where I like it.
He muttered into the microphone. And that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
I like it there. Starting to sound better. Obviously, because we're not in a perfect environment, which is what this tutorial is about, we're getting the hiss, we're not in a treated environment, so we will be removing that. So what I've added here is a gate. Yeah, let's try this first. Let's go with the gate. Well, not try it, I'll show it to you. I'm going to do a -16 floor. And just as a guess, I'm going to put the gate to open at about -32 decibels. I'm going to change the attack to 1, the hold to 1, and the release to about 200. Let's see where this sits. So basically what this is doing, once the audio drops below this -32, the gate's going to kick in and start to remove the dead noise.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio, without missing a beat.
I'm just going to turn this up because the breath then. So I've turned that up because the breath made the gate jump.
Studio, without missing a beat.
So there.
Studio, without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone. And that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
Now that's an easy way to do it. What we can actually do is remove these silent parts. So making some cuts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to create the fade tool, select the fade tool, sorry. I'm actually going to leave the gate on because the gate will kick in when it starts to detect these fades coming in the silence. So listen to that.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone. And that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
Starting to sound better. Now, as we mentioned, the noise, what we're going to do, do a sip of tea. We're going to mess about with some AI plugins. So now I'm going to go to my Waves plugins and I'm going to select Clarity Vox. So now we're going to start reducing noise from the audio. Now what I've noticed when a lot of people go to use noise reduction, they go way too harsh with it. I want you to think of it like this. When you're recording a video to green screen, if you do a bad job and you can see the green edges around your subject, it breaks the illusion of the video. Now with audio, it's sort of the flip side. You don't want it too clean. You don't want to remove every single bit of room noise and things like that, because that also breaks the illusion. It sounds unnatural. So what we want to do with these tools is we want to remove the unwanted noise, but we don't want to remove the room noise and just the natural sounds there as well. So what you'll actually do is you'll go quite low on the noise reduction. So for this particular plugin, I'm going to start at 30. And so instead of whacking it all the way up, like maybe you've done in the past or you've heard on different videos, what we're going to do is we're going to start quite low. We're going to start at 30. Because these particular AI plugins create a lot of stress on my computer, I'm going to have to zoom out.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio.
So now we can hear that a lot of the unwanted noise is removed. So if I sort of disengage it and re-engage it, you'll be able to hear this.
Midway
so this
through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a
on. Oh, that just crashed.
He muttered into the microphone, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection. Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach.
So that's just cleaned up, really, all the unwanted crap that we don't want. Now another cool AI tool by Waves that we're not actually going to use in this one is the de-reverb. So if we had a lot of unwanted reverberation in the room, so after we've removed the unwanted noise, we can start to shape the reverb in the recording as well and remove it. But obviously, again, we don't want to whack it all the way up. We just want to delicately start to add it, and once we find a nice point, stop, because again, we don't want to break that illusion. So now we've got a somewhat finished piece of audio if we didn't want it mixed to any music. But now what I'm going to do so we can mix it to music is I'm actually going to remove these bits so it's back down to -6 because we don't want it brought up to -3 just yet.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud...
Just adjusting the sibilance again because obviously it's not reading as high of a signal anymore. Oops, don't want that one. Let's remove this one. So what I'm going to quickly do is it's -6 now. I'm going to bounce this out. So now if we wanted to mix this to music, we can do. Let's drop this in. I'm going to turn some of the plugins off. So now we've got the recording here.
Midway through recording his dramatic...
What we're going to do is we're going to introduce a track. So now I've got this track and I've got the stems because what tends to happen is the audio will be peaking when you just download the track as a whole. So I'm actually just going to bring these audio levels down, sort of get them where I want them. It's not too bad, -17. So we've got the voiceover going at -6, we've got the music going at -17.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection. Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
So roughly, that's sort of where we would want it, but what we're actually going to do now, a little trick for the voiceover to sit nicely on top, is we're going to create a sidechain. So now what this sidechain is going to do, once we've selected the voiceover, it's going to reduce the music a bit like ducking when it's playing. Let's go with 2.2 actually. But instead of ducking consistently, it's just going to react to when the selected audio, which in this case is a voiceover, reaches the threshold. So actually I'm going to have a quiet high release on that. I'm going to start with 300.
Midway through
as we can see
recording
here,
his dramatic
that's the reduction.
voiceover,
Once the voiceover
Gianni's
comes
stomach
in,
let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection. Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
So what this is doing is it's just helping us to make the voiceover sit on the music a bit better. We can see the stereo out is -5.7. So to get back to broadcast levels, which is a bit of a loose term because we might just be putting this out on YouTube or whatever. I quite like putting all my audio out at -3 dB. I think that's quite a nice blanket level to put out. So if we go, so we're at -5, we're gonna have to do some quick maths here. If we add 2.7 decibels of gain.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
So now it's reaching -3. Just to make it a bit flatter, I'm going to add another limiter. And this is purely on the stereo output, so the master output of the audio.
Midway through recording his dramatic voiceover, Gianni's stomach let out a loud growl that echoed through the studio. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the microphone, and that, folks, is the sound of true hunger for perfection.
Now we have it, that you'll end up with a result sort of like this. That's my process of taking voiceover and ADR from the recording stage to a final product. In the download file, you'll get access to all 4 of the voiceovers that we recorded in this tutorial, as well as 5 other voiceover recordings that were real job recordings. So you'll get to mess about with mixing. So just to go back, each microphone, each scenario is going to be different. You might be able to get a good result taking a carbon copy of the settings I've shown you, but it's best to mess about and tweak about and see what fits for you and that particular recording. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. It's my first video in this style. I've now set myself a goal of putting 2 videos out a month, which will include tutorials like this and other videos that I just like making. So I hope to see you at the next one. Thank you for watching. How long would we go? 30 minutes? Fucking hell. Without missing a beat, he muttered into the mic. And that, folks, is the true... Fucking hell. Am I messing this up? Am I messing this up now?